Hello, everyone. I'm David Braid. I'm the program coordinator for BARI. I'm joined by my colleagues Riley Tucker and Shunan Yu, who are data consultants for BARI, and we'll be leading you through our Boston data portal in the training. If you have any questions, we'll have a period at the end where we can ask questions, but I'm going to go through a general discussion and some introductions to start off this training, and then we'll jump into the Boston Data Portal. Before we go ahead and get started, just a few remarks. This is in a collaboration with Northeastern University City and Community Engagement. They'll be hosting this training along with us. For those who don't know BARI, I'll just give you a quick rundown. The Boston Area Research Initiative seeks to spur original cutting-edge research in the greater Boston area that both advances urban scholarship, analyzes inequities, and pushes to improve on public policy and practices here in the Boston region. Our community-based trainings serve to provide leaders like yourselves the resources to confidently gather data, cultivate research questions, and advocate for equitable living experiences for your communities. And through this, we hope to grow an ecosystem of data-driven data leaders and advocates that use data and technology to really make an impact on their communities. And with that said, I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues, Riley and Shunan, and you can introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Riley Tucker. I'm a PhD candidate in criminology at Northeastern, and I'm also one of BARI's data consultants. So me and Shunan, and she can tell you a little bit more about kind of like her specific niche in this role. But really kind of like the data consultants, we serve to kind of like help members of the public, members of Northeastern, kind of like use our resources to answer important questions. So it could be like someone in the city like has a question that they want to answer, but they're not sure like what the research tasks are, or they want to like understand BARI's research data. Shannon and I are available to kind of like be consultants to kind of help, people in the city and like, the greater Boston area kind of like figure out how to approach these questions. So kind of like on that note, if there's after today's trainings, if you have any kind of like lingering questions or if ideas come up that you're like, oh man, using this data would be so cool if I could do this type of thing, please reach out. Like we love getting these emails and kind of like spreading the BARI data kind of like throughout the area. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out if there's any lingering questions after today.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. That's a really great summary of our data consultant's role. Yeah, so I'm Shuna Yu. I'm a sociology PhD candidate at Northeastern University. And as Riley mentioned, we do all types of data training with community members. And I'm also working with Northeastern professors across different disciplines because we really want to spread BARI data into classrooms. And we really hope students can use these very updated data sets in their class exercises or their homework, or even apply it further into their research. Yeah, so we are very excited to have you here. And I guess then we can do a short round of self-introduction. Maybe in this round of self-introduction, you can just brief us, tell you who you are, what organization you represent, and what research questions that really driven you to participate here. If it's possible, you could also tell us what type of difficulties you may ever run into and what type of results you really want to get from this training. With that in mind, how about we start with Kelly Durning, if I pronounce your name correctly. Yeah, please correct me if I pronounce your name incorrectly.
Yeah, you got it perfect. I'm a student at Northeastern. I'm in my second year and I'm studying international affairs and sociology. And then I'm also on co-op with the Office of Community Service and Civic Engagement. So I'm the Civic Engagement Co-op. And I don't have much know-how on data analysis, so I'm really excited to get to know more about it.
Thank you, Kelly. How about Lisa? Yeah, Lisa Morden.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Lisa Mord, and I work with Kelly, so it's a nice lead-in. I'm new to Northeastern as of November. I'm the Assistant Director of Civic Engagement. I'm learning all the different resources that we have, and part of the team that I oversee, the Alliance of Civically Engaged Students, has educators who are students that educate our larger group of students, and they are often sharing information about the city of Boston and the communities that we're in and that we serve. So I think this information will be very valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I also work with professors specifically in terms of for those classes, focuses on civic engagement as well as community service. So I believe we could collaborate a lot in the future. Yeah, so how about Megan Wolf?
Hi, I'm Megan. I have sort of wearing two hats here. I work for the Rafael Hernandez Dual Language School in Roxbury, in Boston, and I do a lot of development there. So we're always looking at data for, in part for fundraising or just analyzing, different student metrics. And I also am part of a grassroots parent organization in Boston called Quest, Quality Education for Every Student, and we follow sort of policy in Boston. So we're always kind of analyzing data, looking at, we're generally looking at equity issues across the city.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, because all our the data sets are Boston based, and we have a high focus on the equity issues, no matter racial equality or other dimensions of economic, social inequality. So I think lots of data sets, you may find it very interesting. So how about next one, Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Hines. I'm a student at Northeastern in the Master's in Urban Planning program, and I'm also doing a co-op with the Campus Planning, Real Estate, and Facilities Group, and I'm interested to learn more about the work of BARI and also just various data sources that I can use in my class project. So I'm just here to learn.
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, that's forever the first to go for us to be here.
Thank you.
Yes, sure. And Glenn, yeah, we're very familiar with you already, but you could still introduce yourself to the rest of the audience. Oh, we cannot hear you, Glenn. Maybe you muted yourself.
Sorry about that. Glenn Hazelton, I teach GIS at Northeastern and in a variety of programs, and I've talked to the BARI group a number of times, and I'm here to observe and see how you've done since the last time I checked in with you.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, your feedback has been very helpful. And thanks for keeping track of us. So how about the next one? Napak.
Hi, my name is Napak. I am a student at Northeastern pursuing Master of Public Policy, and I am doing a co-op at the same place at Barbara, and my boss is also here in Negari. I'm helping her creating maps, so I'd love to learn more about data in general.
Thank you, Napak. Yeah, because today's focus is all about mapping as well as data resources. So I think that would be very helpful for you. So how about the next one, Negari?
Yes, hi. My name is Negari. I'm the GIS manager for the Department of Planning, Real Estate, and Facilities at Northeastern. So I have been meaning to connect with BARI for a while. I'm just interested in hearing what kind of data you have available and what kind of work you do there. And also community engagement is part of is very important for the Office of Planning and addressing the work as related to campus planning, especially when it comes to working with neighborhoods on the university master plan and other developments. So I'm interested in hearing about those as well.
Thank you, Negari. Yeah, we have lots of students work on the to mapping out the relationship between Northeastern and Roxbury neighborhood.
Okay.
Yes, Yes, I think you may find lots of works we're going to present later interesting.
Very
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So how about the next one, Michael?
How you doing? My name is Mike Fitzgerald. I work in the Office of City and Community Engagement. I'm actually sitting in Northeastern Crossing right now on Tremont Street, and we're kind of reassessing what kind of programming we're going to have here for the community. And I thought this would be a good place to maybe start brainstorming.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I like your attitude. You already have a question in your mind and you would like to bring it here to brainstorm together. Yeah, I hope we would have more time for us to brainstorm in the last session of this training, because the last session is specifically for our Q&A section. And would be very excited to hear more about that, Michael. So how about the next one, Katherine?
Hi there, my name is Katherine Latoff. I'm a first-year graduate student at Northeastern's program of Engineering and Public Policy, and I'm here to learn about data sampling. I just saw a lecture by Dr. Dan O'Brien about his efforts with BARI around Boston, and I was interested in learning more about mapping and analyzing data and ensuring equality and equity among all parts.
Yeah, welcome, Katherine. Yeah, Dan O'Brien is our director, and I'm glad you get exposed to BARI through him, and hope we could present more related resources to you today. So how about the last one, Dave?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave Isberg. So I'm the Assistant Vice President of City and Community Engagement. I still have my bean pot attire on here today. It was a late night last night. You know, these training sessions and information sessions have just been really popular. I mean, like they fill up so quick that we got emails from community members saying, how do I get into this training? So I'm like, let me just kind of observe and learn, and then just we'll kind of circle back and we'll just continue to have them. But I didn't know if there was a way to increase capacity somehow on the attendees. So, which is a kudos to your team, because people are really interested in what you're teaching and sharing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And thanks for your feedback in terms of increasing capacity. We would definitely incorporate that suggestion. And maybe in future, we will have some recorded videos. We would definitely think of the potential ways to increase the audience number. Yeah. So I know the last one, Shiona, she cannot speak at this moment because she's in a shared space. Maybe Shiona, if it's possible, you could type some basic information about yourself. But yes, so based on, I think this round of self-introduction, I can see lots of people, first of all, they're come here to learn. They're really curious to know the BARI-related resources, what type of data sets we can provide, and what kind of mapping tools we're using. And I think the second category, I can see some participants, they have a very burning questions in their mind, and they hope to discuss and brainstorm together. So we definitely wish to incorporate two of these type of needs. So now I will first hand over to my colleague Riley. He will give you a brief overview of our research map, and then I will give you a brief introduction of our data library. And in the end, we can have some more Q&A, or we can have some exercise or some fun in the data playground. So now I will hand it over to Riley.
Great, thanks, Junin. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So I'm gonna be hanging out kind of like on a couple websites that are maintained by BARI. So these are on the BARI webpage. You can find them there, but I think David is gonna like plop the link in the chat so that you can kind of like get there. Let me share my screen. Okay. Do you all see like like my web browser on the screen? Great. So this is the Boston Data Portal website. And so we kind of like break our data resources into a couple different categories because we just have like so much we want to kind of like guide users through there. And so it kind of has two main components. So we're going to spend like a lot of our training today looking at the Boston area research map. So this is our page where you can kind of like get a broad overview of our different data sets, see them visualized on a map, which is really important for telling stories, and kind of just like, you know, getting a broad overview of what our data is. And I mean, like, this is like pretty comprehensive. Like you can see most of our different variables that we have and kind of like different timescales and stuff. However, there's like a certain, you know, some kind of projects, like you really need to get into the data, right? Like just like looking at maps is not enough. You need to actually get the raw data and like do some calculations on it to kind of answer your research question. So we put all of our raw data in the Boston Data Library, which shouldn't walk you through that after the map. I just want to kind of like contextualize this. We're going to be looking at a bunch of maps that like the context and kind of like explanation is like pretty brief, but we have like these full kind of like documentation files that exist on the data library, right? We've been like thinking a lot about kind of like how's the easiest way to convey this information without overwhelming people. So it's kind of like split up. On that note, I'm going to take us over to the Boston area research map. So if you click this link, this takes you to our map page. And so this is built using technology from Esri, like the ArcGIS technology. This is called a hub. And so this is kind of like a home base for accessing all of our maps. And as you may or may not be aware, we have like a lot of different data sets from different sources, and we'll kind of like go over all of those. But we think that the way that's kind of like easiest for people to kind of like find what they need is to break things into kind of like topical categories. So we have four main kind of like subject areas that we cover with BARI data. Those being housing and land value, commerce and institutions, people and environments, and crime and disorder. So each one of these pictures is actually a button that you can pick that will bring you to a map. And so we're not going to be able to get through like every single map today, because as you'll see, there's like literally hundreds of them. But as you all were kind of like talking about what you were interested in, I took down some notes of kind of like the research questions you're interested in, the subject areas, you know, that you're interested in. And so I'm going to kind of like try to emphasize those areas as much as possible. But if you like see anything on the screen that you're interested in or want more information, feel free to kind of like jump in the conversation here, put something in the chat. This is kind of like supposed to be, you know, we're trying to tailor this to make it meaningful for you all. So if there's any way I can kind of like help explain stuff, just feel free to shout out. So normally where I like to start out, because I think it's pretty intuitive, and I think it also kind of like matches what some of you all have been talking about here as far as like equity and stuff, is people and environments. So if I click this, now we have what's called like a map experience according to Esri's kind of like vernacular. And so just kind of like some basic layout of the screen. In the upper left corner here, you have some information about the data that you're looking at. This comes right from our documentation files that you'll get to see by the end of our training. And each of these red buttons up here are a different data set. And so I can click this and we can get like a whole different set of variables to look at, maps to make, and information about it. But for now, let's just like hang out at the census page. So this is data from the American Community Survey. I think a lot of people have like heard of the census before. It's a government organization that collects data on people. And so like there's like the decennial census that happens once every 10 years where like they knock on every door. But cities change like from year to year, right? Not just every 10 years. So they have kind of like a supplementary program called the American Community Survey where they go out every year and they like knock on like some doors. I think it's like in Boston, I shouldn't put a number on it because I don't know, but I think it's like several tens of thousands of people each year rather than like the whole city of Boston. They'll like knock on their doors, get some information, and then like every 5 years they kind of average those and put those out. So what we're going to be looking at today is kind of all survey responses from 2014 to 2018. right? So we have all this information. The census literally, we like grab like 100 different metrics from the census, and we want to share them with you. So for kind of like navigating the different variables, that all happens over here. So each one of these are a kind of like different topic of map. And we're going to use these eyeballs to kind of like turn on and off what we want to see, what we don't. So just kind of like as an example, if I go through and turn off all of these eyeballs, then we don't see any map, right? We just kind of have like a blank template. And so let's start off with, I'm going to do, I think a couple people mentioned like they're interested in educational equity. So we can start there, right? If I turn on this eye for education, we've like unlocked the education map layers. However, you'll notice that nothing came up. That is because we have so many census layers that we need to kind of create folders for the maps. And so if I click this triangle here, pop that open, here are all of our different educational layers. And so let's just start off with bachelor's degree, right? So all of these maps that we're going to look at, it's going to show like what percentage of people in each Boston neighborhood have that degree as their like highest level. So if I click this eyeball here, now we have a map. And so, you might be wondering, what are those colors that you're looking at? Like, what do they mean? So for that, we need a legend. And this little button up in the upper right corner with like the dots and the lines, I don't know what that's supposed to represent, but that is a legend. So if we click this, what it kind of tells us is what our colors mean. And like sometimes you have to go into the documentation a little bit to get like the full story. But this one is in percentages, right? And so the darker blue a neighborhood is, the more people who live there have a bachelor's degree, right? It's not like they have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. It's like they graduated high school, got a bachelor's degree, and stopped. And so, I mean, you can see like pretty clearly just from looking at this basic map, there is huge kind of like inequity across the city, right? Like you have kind of like the downtown area and kind of like, I don't know, like these patches going kind of like along the edge of Boston are the darker colors, right? These are places where like, a third of residents have at least a bachelor's degree. However, you can see that like Dorchester and Roxbury, kind of like Mattapan, that's like kind of like a hole in the education, right? Like this whole area is places where like half as many people have college degrees. All right, so I mean, like just like from pulling up that map alone, we can start to get like a pretty stark story of neighborhood inequity. And so I know like a lot of people when they're working with these maps kind of like want to show stakeholders and stuff. Like it's nice to be able to tell the whole story of the city, but you're really interested in like a specific neighborhood. You want to be able to say like, okay, here are my constituents. Here's what percentage of them have a college degree type of thing. And so what you can do is you can scroll in. And so it's like a lot of people and me, like every time I want to use like Google Maps where I use like the wheel on my mouse to scroll in, you have to resist that urge because this is not Google Maps and it's like the screen is going to behave straight. Oh, I guess they fixed that. So now you can use, for a while at these trainings I had to be like, don't use the mouse wheel because it like does other functionality, but I guess like Esri heard us. So now you can use like your mouse wheel and scroll in and out nicely. And so if you then click on one of these are called a polygon. If you click on one, you can see exactly what the value is for that neighborhood. So this neighborhood, Seven Hill, has 33% of people who live there have a bachelor's degree. And I mean, it's interesting from an equity standpoint, right? Because this polygon is right next to 3 neighborhoods where it's like drastically lower, right? You have neighborhoods right next door to each other with drastically different levels of education, which is like, it's impactful, You can imagine that like relative deprivation, right? Being right next door kind of this area where like there's different educational resources that can kind of have like, layers of effects. right? And so since we have all these different layers, it's like pretty straightforward to just like turn one off and turn one on. And so that can be useful for telling kind of like more nuanced stories, right? So if we're looking at just bachelor's degrees right now, we might want to say like, okay, a college degree is one thing, but where educational advantage really comes in is in terms of graduate degrees. So let's turn this off and just kind of compare this map of where the bachelor's degrees are compared to the master's degrees. Interestingly, it is a very similar pattern, right? Which is, I mean, I think it makes sense that kind of like, if you have an area where there's a lot of educational resources, and you're just going to have like a higher percentage of people at kind of like all levels, you know, you're going to have more people with bachelor's degrees, more people with master's degrees. Let's see about people with PhDs, right? PhD, you get a pretty similar story to that. And of course, these kind of like inequities that we're seeing do not exist in a vacuum. There's like lots of other kind of like demographic inequities that are tied in there. And one that I think is really interesting because it's like not kind of intuitive. Like there's a lot of discussion about, you know, financial inequities, racial inequities. But I think we have some pretty cool maps about commuting that kind of add a new layer to this story. And so these are from census surveys where they ask people like, how long does it take you to get to work on average? And so if I'm going to pull up this first one, which is like people who commute less than 10 minutes on average, it's like exclusively people who live downtown almost, right? If you live downtown, there's this privilege where like you have enough money, you like work downtown at like some, you know, really fancy corporation where they give you a whole bunch of money so you can afford to live there, right? And then you have this privilege where like you're not spending all day commuting, you have like a 10-minute short trip. Conversely, if we look at where are people having like really long commutes, like these 90+ minute commutes, right? It's like a small number of neighborhoods. And I don't know if we'll have time to kind of get in this today, but like these areas on the map that are showing up in blue are also neighborhoods that, you know, have economic inequities, right? Or like racial segregation. And I mean, so it's kind of like a double jeopardy type thing where you're living in a segregated community and then you have to spend all of this time going to your job, right? It's like another level of inequity that comes like specifically out of the structure of the city. So I think that's pretty interesting always. And like these commuting times align pretty closely with like commuting methods. So if we look here, and I should have put the legend up. If we look at the percent who are commuting by walking, it is like all downtown, right? That same area where residents tend to have really short commutes are also those same neighborhoods where people are accessible enough to where they work that they can just walk there. Right? I mean, that's like really nice. I mean, you know, I guess people have different kind of like preferences, but to me, the fact that you have even like the choice to just walk into your job without having to take the subway or like deal with traffic and stuff, especially in like these COVID times when people are kind of antsy about like, you know, possibility of infection on public transport, it's a real kind of advantage to be able to walk. And if we kind of compare that to where people drive, I mean, you can imagine not a lot of people driving in Boston, but let's look at public transport. Okay, a lot of people, so that's kind of like the punchline there is that most people who live in cities use public transport to get to work, right? So it's interesting that kind of if you disaggregate by these different kinds of commuting methods, some we see great inequity. Let's look at biking. Yeah, so it's not quite as harsh as the walking, but definitely you can see, and actually this map of like where people bike is not all that different from the education map. Let me, right, so if I pull up bachelor's degree, we're not going to see it until I turn off this eyeball. But if I turn, oops, I've turned this one on, right, those maps. And so I can like kind of like shift back and forth between them by clicking on this eyeball. That's like kind of a similar pattern, right? There like starts to appear to be some kind of relationship between biking to work in like college education. Right. So I mean, just by kind of like looking into this data, you can really start to get like a sense of different communities and the features of those communities. And so I saw the chat. Barbara asked, "Can we map area median income on top of the highest degree earned?" Yes. So I have the bachelor's map up right now. Let me turn off this. And so median income data. So if I go to economic standing, we already have median household eyeball turned on. Then if I turn on this, right? So what we're looking at now is the median household income. And so, right, it's like kind of tricky because when you have polygon maps, you can't just like layer stuff on top of each other so easily, right? Like if anyone is ever thinking of kind of like grant reports or like proposals, like if you have two polygons, it's kind of nice to be able to look at them like side by side. We don't exactly have this capability in our map right now, so it's kind of like a matter of flipping back and forth. Right now, if we look at median household income, and I turn this off to look at bachelor's degree, there definitely are some similarities there. But it's actually kind of interesting that it's not like an exact match. And I wonder if we look at high school, if that'll be a closer. Okay, no, that's yeah, the high school one is like kind of weird sometimes. Actually, if we think of it in reverse. So when we get to the playground, there's kind of ways that you can custom adjust color schemes that can kind of like allow this. But if we turn this on and we look at like, here are the white areas that have the lowest household income. If we turn it off, those same areas are also the places that are like predominantly high school graduates as opposed to kind of like higher degrees. Or if we look at less than high school, it's kind of like a similar map. So my interpretation of these is that of these kind of maps next to each other is that there is definitely an association between education and median household income, right? I mean, like that's not a shocking story, but it's a really important story. And the fact that we can kind of, you know, take our preconceived notions and show that they're like supported by data, I think is really powerful kind of tool as people, you know, who want to kind of contribute to urban discussions and everything. And so we can come back to the census stuff if people kind of have other questions about that come up. But one thing that I wanted to go into is the Boston neighborhood survey, because I know a couple people kind of like mentioned themes of like, what did I write down? Civic engagement was something that came up quite a bit. And so what we're looking now is the Boston neighborhood survey. This was a survey conducted by some scholars at Harvard, kind of in the mid like 2000s. And so they really wanted to know kind of like, how do neighborhoods kind of differ from one another in terms of social relationships? You know, not only kind of like how much do people earn, how much education do people have, but actually getting into like the nature of social interactions. And so what we are looking at right here is a map of social cohesion. So what they did is they went into like all these different neighborhoods in Boston and they asked people a bunch of survey questions, like on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do people trust each other around here? On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do people get along? And if you kind of like take those 5, they asked 5 of these questions, and they ask people on a scale of 1 to 5, then they average them and you get the score of social cohesion. So a higher number, or like in this case, a bluer shade, suggests that like people in the neighborhood feel like they're more connected to one another. And so you can imagine that's like really important for like generating civic engagement. So I've actually done a little bit of research on this in Chicago, and it's like connections between people is one of like the main things that motivates people to kind of like engage in local activism, right? So when people are kind of like more connected to the others in their community, they're more likely to actually like go out and get involved in these efforts. Yeah, so Lisa says, where can we find the definitions of the terms? So all of that information is going to be included in the code book. It's a little hard to see. You can technically like get to it from this link here. We haven't figured out a good way to like make that pop. But Shunin will also go through the data portal where you can kind of like see where all that stuff lives. And so kind of like I mean, like this survey is just like really interesting. It's like fascinating to me, kind of like what it says about neighborhoods. Another one that I think is super interesting here is intergenerational closure. So this is about the relationships between adults and youth who live in the same neighborhood. So they like go out and they ask the adults, like on a scale of 1 to 5, do youth in the area have someone that an adult they can go to if they like have a problem, right? How well do adults and youth in the neighborhood get along? And so, I mean, this has been conceptualized as a source of social capital, right? Like if youth kind of like grow up in a community where adults are empowering them, like the idea is that, you know, youth can kind of have more positive outcomes. And I see the chat popping up. And so I'd say the last one that I would kind of like to get into with the Boston neighborhood survey stuff is reciprocated exchange. So this is actually about like how often do people interact? Like social cohesion is just like, do people like each other? But reciprocated exchange is getting into like on a scale of 1 to 5, how often are you kind of like running into your neighborhoods and your neighbors in the street and having conversation? How often are you attending parties at each other's homes? Right, just kind of like another way of thinking through kind of like the social connectivity of a community. And you can imagine like all of these measures together like tell a pretty strong story, and they're all pretty highly correlated. Like if we look kind of between them, you kind of get the same pattern of the city of Boston. But I mean, like as far as thinking of like how to kind of like create activism or grassroots efforts within a neighborhood, I think this stuff is just like super crucial to think about. So I just always kind of like to plug it at these things. Barbara, so yes, this is all public information. This stuff is intended for people to use the data. You can certainly use these maps. So if you like just wanted something like this, you could take like a screenshot on your computer, and that's perfectly fine. In our playground, we have a little bit of functionality for actually, I think you need to sign up for like a Esri account, but there is functionality where you can like download a really nice PDF of a map. And there's also kind of some tools there for like changing colors and transparency and stuff like that. So I think for a lot of people, if you wanted to like create a map and use it for something, you would probably want to make that in the playground rather than this kind of like brief overview. But we'll get there. And I mean, but like to answer your question, yes, this public information, you can absolutely use this. And the raw data we make available as well. And so I guess in the interest of time here, I'm going to back out and look at housing and land value. I know there's like a handful of people in here who are interested in kind of like urban planning type stuff. So this like under the housing stuff, we really have quite a bit. And so what we're looking at right now is the property assessment database. So like the tax assessment, you know, part of the government, like kind of like keeps tracks of all these different buildings in the city. And so there's like a data set that's like literally like 380,000 land parcels. So literally like the grass that every building on Boston is like located on. There's like a big data set with all of those. And so we take that information every year and process it, and we make like some metrics that we think are kind of like interesting to understand like the physical structure of the city. And so what we're looking at right now is just the residential building value per square foot. So here our colors are about, it's like $1 amount. And it's like, you know, how much money is the average building worth per square footage? Because for each building, we know the exact like square footage from the tax assessment database. So we can kind of like map that to the size of a neighborhood. And we have that for kind of like residential non-residential. I think this one is probably one of our like coolest maps that we have, one of our coolest like data products. So this variable is called neighborhood effect on property value. And so what this map represents is that if you took a building in like the average neighborhood, which would be like here, because it's kind of like a neutral color, you can imagine taking a bulldozer and picking up that building with like all of its characteristics, like really literally like taking that, maybe you need like a plane or something to pick it up and like take it across the city, but you take that building with all of its characteristics and you drop it in another neighborhood. What happens to the value of that building, right? And so if we go from here, if you take it right downtown where the green is, right, that's like the value of your building has gone up simply because of like the neighborhood that surrounds it. Conversely, if you go to Roxbury or Dorchester, it's like a really strong negative effect, right? And I mean that's like real equity issues, right? Like serious, like it's like nothing at all about like the quality of the buildings or the size of them. It is literally just like being in that community. There is a negative effect on the valuation, right? So I mean like this is kind of like a pretty serious story here. But we were able to kind of like produce this because we have so much rich information about every single building in the city. Like without that kind of like rich data infrastructure, it would be really kind of like impossible to make that kind of thing happen. And so we also have places of interest data. And so in that data set, there is a variable called p-type. And so the tax assessment database just like gives like a 3-number code to every building, kind of suggesting like what is the land usage that goes on there. And so using that, we can map, as for example, like where all the schools are in Boston. And you could look at like, so we can put multiple of these layers up at once. So you can see like schools, oh, they're all black. So it's not, well, that'll be better in the playground. But right, so each one of these dots are a school, and we can actually zoom in and click on it, and you get some information about that school, right? So you can see what the address is, kind of, it's odd that's labeled a school. It seems like community center to me. But I guess that Carter Center must be a school. Okay, yeah. So school type is special. So I don't know, that's either like a charter school or something else that I'm not familiar with. But right, like just kind of like by clicking on these dots, there's a pretty good amount of information to understand what you are looking at. Okay. And I guess, yeah, let me do this as well. So another one that we have on property that's pretty good is the building permits data. So this is like anytime someone in the city wants to build a building or change a building or destroy a building, they are supposed to kind of like apply for a permit with the city. So every year the city sends us all the permits and we process them into a data set. And so what we are looking at right now is building permits for new construction. So it's actually a percentage. So it's the percentage of the buildings in each neighborhood or plots of grass, you can think of it, where someone submitted a permit for a new building, right? So this was like an empty plot where someone said, I want to build a building here. And it's kind of interesting comparing that to additions or like renovations, right? So additions, this is a, there was a building there already and they wanted to expand on it, right? So it's still development, but it's kind of like a different flavor. And like similarly with renovations, right? Even though these are different kinds of development that is happening, you do get the sense that downtown Boston is where the action is, right? There's kind of like this rapid process where like stuff is getting built up, stuff is getting added onto, stuff is getting changed. And then in terms of demolitions, right, something needs to get taken down to make that nice empty plot of land for new construction. So similarly, like the demolition is really kind of centered in downtown, right? And so all this data is from 2020. It's very possible that when we update this for the year 2021, we'll see completely different numbers. You know what I mean? I know a lot of construction, I think, was kind of like slowed down maybe people weren't taking on as many projects, or maybe people have the time to take on projects and that stuff's coming to fruition. It's hard to kind of say. Barbara said, do we have this permit information for commercial construction? So that would be an interesting data project. What you would need to do is, so like all of our data sets kind of like have IDs that allow you to kind of like merge them together. So if you merged this building permits data set with the property assessments, you could see, so in the property assessments data, there's like a variable, like, is this building commercial or residential? If you merge those together, the building permits data would then tell you for each building permit, what was it, like a residential or commercial structure? And then you could kind of like calculate those numbers. That would be kind of like an extra step. We don't make that, to my knowledge, I don't think that there's a residential or commercial variable inside the building permits data that we release, but it would be possible to answer that kind of question. And that's like a perfect thing that as data consultants, we can kind of help you through it, right? I mean, kind of like if you ever heard the term merge before in a data sense, we can kind of like walk through what it means to merge data sets together, what kind of like technical tools you would need to do that. So these are the kind of things that are really fun to talk about in data consultations. Okay. In the interest of time here, I'm going to move on to the playground, right? So we have a couple of these that we didn't even get to as far as kind of like commerce and crime and disorder, but all of our kind of like topical maps have a similar kind of like layout intended them. And again, if you have any questions about anything, you can just email us and we're happy to kind of like walk through anything. And so as you may have noticed, those maps are relatively bare bones as far as like how much you can kind of change them. You can like pull up data or turn it off, but there's like not very much flexibility as far as like changing colors or kind of like that kind of thing. So what we've done is made this data playground, which is kind of tailored to support that more like map building type of stuff. And so if I click here, we have a similar layout with just a couple more buttons on it, right? So we have a blank template right now. We can, the world is our oyster, right? And so if I click on layers here, this is where we'll get to that kind of screen where all of the data is. And it's like a little different, right? Because before we had all of our data topics like split up, like every data set got its own page. Here, we want to like facilitate the comparing of data sets, right? Kind of like the cross topic engagement. So we have to put all of them kind of like on this panel, and we have the triangle system, right? So if we like click on a triangle, we can see all of the layers. I'm going to put up social cohesion just because I think it's interesting, right? And so we have this map, we have our legend over here, and if we, let's see, so you need to highlight the layer. So if I click on this, it turns blue, and then over here, we get all of these different kind of like tools that we can use to change the screen. So one thing you might want to do is know what is underneath these polygons, right? Because they're so dark blue, you can't really tell what neighborhood is underneath. If someone doesn't know Boston, it'd be hard to get a frame of reference. But this button for transparency, if we click this button and drag it, we can start to see what is underneath the city, right? And you can zoom in and you can actually see like some of the labels of the streets and the parks and stuff, while also still getting some colors that kind of indicate the nature of social cohesion in these neighborhoods. And one thing that I think is really nice is like, we're looking at kind of like a stereotypical like Google Maps-ish base map, but sometimes that's not always like the prettiest thing to put in a report. So if you click over here to base map, we get all of these different ways to change the background. And right, like these can help you to tell your story. If you have something about kind of like, I don't know, like urban structure, you want to kind of like think more about commuting stuff and how it relates to kind of like social dynamics, maybe you would want to click on the streets, right? Highlight kind of like the street networks that are underlying the neighborhoods. And then, you know, you can see really in high detail kind of like what the streets look like, and like the blue kind of indicates like how strongly people are getting along. And I just think these are like really kind of like nice. There's all kinds of stuff. Here's a community map. So this one is kind of like emphasizing Boston's different neighborhoods. So that's cool. You can also, just like before, so I don't forget, here is where you would click to save it. So you can click save. And I believe you need to be signed into an account to do that. But if you kind of have that, you can save it and download it as a PDF. Okay. Let's see. I want to do a little more changing of stuff here. And so, oops. I'm going to turn us back to no transparency. A common type of thing I think people kind of like itch to do when they see a map is like change the colors. Maybe you just don't like our style, or maybe there's like a story that you want to tell. And so what I've done is, while I have social cohesion highlighted, is I've clicked over to styles. And here I can set style options. And here is where we can really go crazy as far as like changing the appearance. So clicking this gives us different color schemes, right? And so maybe instead of like the blue, white, I mean, it doesn't really matter which one I pick right now. Let's just pick orange, right? So now we have our social cohesion map, but instead of like the places where social cohesion is really strong as being in blue, they are in orange now. And so maybe you want to say, okay, we want the places that are low in social cohesion to be orange instead of those that are high. If you click theme and go to, sorry, not there. If you go to style options and then click this button, that will invert the color map. And so now we're kind of like looking, we have like this like orange color that suggests kind of like places where social cohesion is low in the city. Right, and so I mean, like, there's like all kinds of stuff you can do. You can like custom change the zone. Like if you only wanted to look like if you only wanted the really kind of like low cohesion places in orange, you could do something like this, right? And then you get like a really clear picture of like, okay, these are like the problem neighborhoods in Boston as far as social cohesion, right? These are like the very kind of bottom of the distribution where people are just kind of like repeatedly saying that they don't get along. Right, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, like, I think a lot of this is kind of like you need to be working on a project where you had a need. You need to say like, oh, I really want to highlight like this type of neighborhood, right? And then there's like a lot of functionality in the playground as far as kind of like changing stuff. So I think this about rounds out our the playground section of this training. And so in a moment, I'll pass over to Shunin to go through the data library. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions I can answer about like mapping or the playground?
I think there's a question really about whether Barbara's, that's how to download them or just take a snap of it.
Yeah, so I was talking about it a little bit. So if you click this like save and open button, I can't click it because I'm not logged in. You would need an Esri account to actually like download it as a PDF. But so I'm on Windows. A lot of times if I just put like in my search bar snipping tool, that's like a tool that you can use to kind of like screen cap and save a PDF. Lisa says, how frequently is the data updated? So we do annual updates like right around this time. So in like the next couple months, you'll probably get like an email from the BARI email saying like data update has occurred. And so like since each of these are annual, yeah, it's like kind of like in the spring, we do the updates for as many data sets as we can. I think all the ones that we've looked at today get updated. So I know we're about to put up the 1519 ACS. I'm not sure if the 2020 decennial census data has been done yet. There's like a lot more steps. They like redraw all the neighborhood boundaries and stuff. So I'm not sure if the census has released that yet. But as soon as that kind of like gets released and we get this 1519 stuff up, I know we'll be kind of like moving to get that processed. But in general, the answer is every year. Thanks, Barbara. Let us know if you have any questions. On that note, I'm going to pass over to Shunin. I'll stop sharing my screen. I also have to leave, so I just wanted to say before I go, thank you everyone for joining us, and let us know if you have any questions. You'll be in good hands with Shunin and David here.
Thanks so much, Riley, for such a comprehensive introduction. Oh, he's already gone. Yes, so now I will bring you to our data portal. Yes, so I'll share my screen. So as you can see, as Riley has already mentioned, on this Boston data portal, there are two components. Riley has already walked you through this Boston area research map. But as you also ask some questions, for example, there's a question about what's the definition of social cohesion. So when you walk through this research map, you may be confused about the meaning of each legend. Like when you look at the housing part, you may get confused about, for example, what's the meaning of intergenerational closure, or what's the meaning of social cohesion, or what's the meaning of informal social control. You have an instinct understanding of these words, but you still want to know the accurate meaning of it. And it's hard to get to know it just through the legend. That's why we need this data library places. This is where it will play a role here. So if you click this button, this will bring you to a data library. So this is a place where we store the raw data sets. So after you have get a visual understanding of the mapping on this research map, if you want to do some more data analysis, or if you understanding each legend in a more accurate way, you need to go back to the data library, because this is where we restore all the raw data sets. So for example, let's just go to neighborhoods, Boston neighborhood survey, because I've seen lots of questions about that site. And also this is a web page. So you can see here we have much more data sets compared to the research area map. So we only choose a small portion of the data sets we have in the data library to present it in the map. So let's just go to Boston neighborhood survey, since I've seen lots of questions related to that one. So I really want to show you about that one. So let's just type the Boston neighborhood survey here. So if you want to look for a specific data set, type the name here and you click it, and then it will pop up all the potential results. So these results include different years, also related to the questions, how frequently we update these data sets. So you can see we have the Boston neighborhood survey during the past, since 2017, also 2019. So we want to find the latest data sets. So let's just choose this 2019 one. So after you click this, I want to highlight one thing. Whenever you open this data library and you go into a specific file, always look for the documentation first. So the documentation is like the cookbook for you to understand these data sets. So if you click this button, access file, and you choose the PDF file, it will ask you to input some basic information here. Okay, Glenn has a question. You're looking at the supermarkets in the web map, but the search in the Dataverse does not find it. Oh, I think the supermarket is in the point of interest, that one. So I think, yeah, we can go into this question later. I want to help you to find these data sets on the data library. So I think the supermarket is in that section of point of interest. So they have all the point data set, including schools, supermarkets, colleges, hospitals, and we can check it later here. So if you click this PDF and you click download section, it will ask you, oh, I've already have information here. So it's already downloaded. So, and if we click here, you can see this will give you an overview of this documentation. It includes all the information that you need to know. For example, where is the data resources, where we get access to this data set. So you can see here, this is a place we downloaded from this center, and it will also tell you the components of these data sets, including including the service scale measures, including how many waves we've done this type of service. And it will also tell, and then after that, you can see in the table of contents, you can see we have the Boston neighborhood survey results, and we also have a summary. We have different scales in terms of both the census tract scale, and we also have a neighborhood scale. So for those people who are interested in, for example, the definition of social cohesion, you can see here we have a specific column to explain the meaning of each term. So for example, we have this physical disorder, and you can see we have questions listed behind. So let's look for the social cohesion. It is this question here. So you can see the definition of social cohesion is the strength of positive social relations between people in the neighborhood. And how this is calculated, because like Riley mentioned, this is a survey data set, and it gives you a bunch of scale choices from 1 to 5 to choose. For example, people in my neighborhood can be trusted. Do you feel this statement is true or not? If you feel it's true, then it's 100% true. Then you choose 5. If you think it's not true, absolutely not true at all, so you choose 0. Then so this is a scale options. So you can see these 5 questions, including whether people in my neighborhood can be trusted, and whether people in my neighborhood are willing to help each other, whether they know or like each other, whether they get along with each other, whether they share the same values about what is right and what is wrong. So all these 5 questions, we calculated the mean score of these 5 questions. And this is how we get the final results of social cohesion. Oh, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so that's why I want to highly recommend you when you get confused about the meaning of the legend, because usually when you look at the legend, you may not understand what's the meaning of social cohesion. You may also get confused what's the number means, whether this is this counts or is this percentage. So at this time, when you get confused, always go back to the documentation part. It will give you some answers. And if you're still confused, just shoot us an email for data consultants. And our role is to help you to understand the data sets way much better. So this is the first thing I would like to mention. Whenever you reach out a new data set, always check out the documentation. Documentation is like the guidebook for the data set. It includes all the explanation of each variable and the whole process of data generalization, including data resources, are some very direct data analysis procedures. So this is very important for you to understand. And I also want to just briefly show you how to download these data sets. So for example, here, let's look at some other data sets, because there are so many data sets here. So for example, Riley has showed you some housing and land value. So for example, if you're interested in Airbnb data sets, so if you also type the name here, and it will come up. It's getting a bit slow. So for the Airbnb dataset, I just want to show you how to download it. So here you can also see this is the last update, also related to the question how often we update the dataset. We usually update it twice a year. So this is the latest update. So if you click this, it will guide you towards this Airbnb dataset. So here we have a brief description of this dataset, including the component of it, as well as where we scraped it. Because for our BARI datasets, we have main 2 categories. The first one is administrative dataset. The second one is the online dataset. So for the administrative dataset, you can see here, for example, all the housing, all the ACS, all the census, Boston Neighborhood Survey, Urban Heat Island, they all belong to the administrative data set. But for the housing and land value, including all the information related to Craigslist, Airbnb, these are also administrative data sets, but for Craigslist, Airbnb, these are online data sets, which means we get this data set through the scrapers. So there's a discovery robot, they will scrape the data automatically every day. And our job is we'll download all the data sets generated during the past year, and we will download it and to do some data analysis and then present it in the data library as well as a map. So if you go back to the Airbnb site, when you're in this web page, you can see there's a brief description towards it. And also you should also read the documentation first, then you understand what the title of each data set means. So if you want to download a specific data set, so you can see here, all this data format, it's the CSV data format. This is a universal data format. You can use it in different softwares, including SPSS, including R, including Python. With whatever data analyzing software you choose to use, they're all applicable. So if you are interested in to download Airbnb listings, click this button, access file, and choose the CSV data format. It will also ask you to put some basic information here, and you choose accept. Then this data set is downloaded here. So this is very easy, and I think it's very straightforward as well. I will just mention one more thing is about, so you can see here the tab and CSV, they all belong to this CSV data file. But there's a question, but there's also another data file, it's called a shape file. So this shape file is for you to generate map in this research area map. So just to remember in future, when you see the shape file, this refers to this another type of file specifically for the purpose of generating map. Okay, let me have a look of Napak's question. How do we recognize which data set it is administrative and which is online? And are they both available to download? Okay, yeah, so for the first question, how do we recognize? So it's a very easy way to distinguish. So you can see all the property data sets. So for example, here, property data sets, as long as it's not generated through a robot, a scraper, it's usually from the administrative data set. And also another way is to think about the data resources. So for example, for the property assessment and building permits, we get the data resources from the government, from the Boston government, that is administrative data set. But for the Craigslist and Airbnb, the data resources, for example, for the Airbnb is from a website. It's called insideairbnb.com. For Craigslist, of course, it's also from the Craigslist website. So this is a very direct way to differentiate, just to think about the data resources. For this type of online data set, the resources are from the online websites, and we use a robot, a scraper, to scrape the data sets, then it is online resources. For this property assessments, building permits, American Community Survey, it's all from the administrative data set, and we get it through the Boston government, then it is administrative data set. And oh, okay. And the second question, are they both available to download? Yes, they are both available to download. So here we can briefly browse the data portal here. You can see we have many different types of data sets. So for example, we have the geographical infrastructure for the city of Boston. Through this one, you can get all the census tract ID and the neighborhood ID. And also we have 311 call, 911 call. Riley does not have time to go into this through the map, but we also visualize here in the research area map. I could briefly mention here. So for example, if you're specifically interested in crime and disorder, here we can see we have the 911 calls as well as the BNS survey, but it's different variables compared to the BNS survey that we just mentioned. So for the crime and disorder parts, the BNS survey focused on gun violence, focused on social disorders. Yeah, it's still not coming up yet. So, but for 911 call, we can see we get these variables including social disorder, private conflict, violence, gun crime. So if you want to understand the difference between between social disorder and gun and violence, you should also go back to the documentation, because just based on the literal understanding, these two variables seem very similar. But I remember the fundamental difference is whether gun is involved or not. So I think to understand those subtle and nuanced differences, you should go back to the documentation that I just mentioned. So here, yeah, you can see we have 311 call, 911 call. It really based on your interest. If you're interested in crime and disorder, I would definitely recommend to go into the map and then go back to the data library. And also we have some Craigslist posting, like I just mentioned, this is the online resources. And we also have the building permits. This is the administrative data set. And we also have this code, building, and property violation in Boston. So this one is also an administrative data set. Just thinking whether we can generate this data set from an online website or we have to get it from Boston government. So this one, obviously, we don't have this type of website. So we have to obtain this data resources from Boston government. And also I would like to mention one more thing is we Riley did not touch upon it in the map, but we also have COVID related data set. So if you're specifically interested in how Boston people have navigated this pandemic, you're interested in the unequal health access between different racial neighborhoods, you could also click this one to check the different data sets. And then you can generate your own shape files, and you can, as long as you have the shape file, you can make your own map. So here's also, for you to understand our data library better, you could also use this user guide. It will give you a sense of all the categories included in this data portal, as well as how you should use this database. So I think here's some other information, and also this is Glenn's your question about the places of interest. So, and I think there's also one about the points of interest here. So that's where we get this supermarket data set. Yes, so I think this one is pretty much straightforward. So is there any questions for this one? And then we can open the Q&A and brainstorm for your own questions or for your own project. So is there any questions towards the data portal, the data library part? If we do not, I think I could mention one more thing. I think Riley did not mention before he left because he's a bit in a rush of leaving. I think there's a very important function in the data library, in the data playground that he forgot to mention. That is a filter function. I'll share my screen again here. So you can see here, I think Riley has already mentioned the style and how to change the color, how to change the transparency, how to use the base map. I would like to mention one more thing. I think it's very handy when you're playing with this playground. So you can see here, if you go to ACS, this section, you can see this is the only section that this data set is based on the state level, while in other sections, it's all based on in the Boston level. So you can see here, if you zoom in, so if we zoom in, you can see this one is really based on the state level. And how shall we deal with it? Because we are specifically interested in Boston-based demographic information. So here, this function is very useful. So if you click this and click show properties, this will change this all the gray functions into black again. And if you click filter, and here you can add expression. So if you just want to limit the scale into the Boston-based area, you choose census tract ID starts with, and the third one is 25025, because this is the number of Suffolk County. Then you click save it. Then here you can see we immediately narrow down the scale of the map into the Boston-based area. And I think we've already written this down here. If you're interested, if you forget the number, so you can see here. If you only want to include census tract within Suffolk County, then you can create a new expression where census ID, this is the first line, starts with, this is the second drop down, and the third one is the Suffolk County ID number. And also, so here you can see in this one we've already generated, there's still a very large range of the C area. So if you click this button, if you include another expression here, so if you click filter and add expression, so you can see here, you can add endless expression based on your interest. So if you add this, it does not include, does not contain, and you put this number here. I've already put this number here already. You copy it and you put it here, does not contain. Does not contain this one. If you cancel. If you also add this expression here, and then let's see what's going to happen. If you click save, then you can immediately see we narrow down the scale from we filtered out this C area. Oh, okay, this is David info. Yeah, so this is very important for you to narrow down. So for example, if you're only interested in Roxbury area, then you can go to the Boston government to check the census tract ID of that specific neighborhood. Then you can add expression here, and you can also see we have multiple choices here. You can choose census tract ID is or is not, include or exclude, start with, end with, contain, does not contain. So it's a very powerful tool for you to narrow down a specific census tract ID or specific neighborhood, or you specifically want to compare two census tract ID. You want to compare how Roxbury and Fenway or Back Bay area, how the racial equity differences differentiated between these two census tract ID. I think this is a very handy tool for you to command. Okay, I think that's all. So do you have any questions towards this? I think this, I just want to mention this because I think this is a very important tool for you to play with while you're using this data playground.
Folks, we'll take the last 10 minutes and just have a conversation, just debrief on your experience and how you plan on using the data in your efforts to do now. John?
Hi, thank you. Quick question to ask you, and I apologize, I did come in a half hour late from another meeting, but I'm struggling to figure out how my department or my class can be affiliated with this or use this. Is this something that we could have talk offline about regarding like how I can use this data and brainstorm ideas about how I can use this? So for example, I'm a co-op coordinator and I do work with international students and trying to find co-ops. Not sure if this could be helpful. I don't know. And the other piece is I do work with service learning providers within the city of Boston for my project management class. And what we do is we do have, obviously partners in the Boston area, and with students didn't know if there's ways for us to touch base and figure out how I can use this data, because there's a lot of cool data in there. I just don't know what to do with it and to make it useful. So it'd be great if there's ways to brainstorm some ideas, or we do it. I don't know what the best way to do that. But I'm very interested. I just don't know how to use this information and looking for ways to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. Yeah, first of all, I would like to say we could definitely schedule another meeting to brainstorm with you, definitely. But just based on your brief description, so there seems to me there's two emerging interests. One is about the international students. Yes, I think the first one, because our data set is very much Boston-based. So I think that may be a question whether it's applicable to other countries or other regions of the world. It really depends on the international students' interest. But we could discuss further about that. And for the second part about the service learning, so actually we've collaborated with a lot with community members who are interested in service learning. So what we've done in the past is usually their specific interest in a particular neighborhood. Like we did one, they're specific interested in housing of Roxbury, and there's another one who are specific in the transportation within Roxbury. So I would recommend you, maybe we could brainstorm with the participants about their interest, whether they're interested in, it can be the regional interest, which neighborhood, which specific census tract ID they're specific interested in. I think another way to frame is about your topic, whether you're interested in health or transportation, or some commercial commercial institutions or crime and disorder. Like it's like to frame it from the big categories. And if you're all interested in housing, okay, then we could dig deeper into it. We could have the property assessment data set. We could have the building permits data set. And we could also have the Airbnb and Craigslist data set. So I would recommend to first to have a brainstorm with the participants together and to come up with a common collective theme for this workshop, whether it's revolving with health, equity, or the gentrification. I hope we could hold this workshop based on the common interest of the data sets. Does it make sense, John?
I think so, yes. I'll be looking forward to having that discussion further with you. And I have some ideas now based on what you're saying. It'd be great to further that information. Because is this information public? Like, can I download this information and then give it to my students that are part of service learning, or
Yes.
probably some of my community partners, or is that a privileged information?
Yeah, it's all public. As long as we've already posted online, it's all
So
public.
it's online, it's public. Perfect.
Yes, it's all free to download and sharing.
Thank you so much.
And Professor, if you'd like us to come to your class, we can probably do a training with your class as well.
Yes, I've done a lot of visits to professor's class. And maybe David, you could connect to John later after this session.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sure. And there's a question from Megan. Can you say again how would get the census tract number for particular? Oh, okay. So actually we have even write it down here. I'll share my screen again. So you can see here, whenever you get confused, so you can see we even write down a sentence because we bet lots of people get confused here. So check this link about census tract ID. So here we'll give you a sense of how the census tract ID works, and it will also give you a sense of where to find it. So you can see this is a census tract code, and this will also tells you the structure of it. Based on this structure, you can see that's why how we get to know Suffolk County starts with 25025. So yeah, so basically it has a structure, and usually a specific particular location, it starts with a five number of it. But usually for a particular neighborhood, I usually just Google it. So for example, if you just Google Boston census tract, this is how I usually do it. You can just Google Boston census tract map. It will give you a particular idea of the census tract number. This is also in this website that we used a lot, Boston Planning and Development Agency. So this one you can see you can get the census tract ID from 2000 till 2010, I think. And census tract ID actually they are pretty stable. And I also want to mention one more thing about our playground. So actually, if you click, we have some census tract layer here as well. If you click the census tract here, census, if you just click census, so you can see, you can totally add this map. This is a Boston neighborhood map here. Okay, so you can add it here, and let me also turn off this, or else we cannot see anything. Let me first turn off this, and you can see this is the Boston neighborhood. It just gives you a very nice sense of the bordering of each neighborhood. And if you want to know the specific census tract ID, I think I will go into this map to get a particular understanding of the census tract ID number. Does that make sense for you, Megan? Okay, yeah, Glenn, thanks for the answer.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful.
Oh, sure, thanks. Yeah, Glenn, thanks for the comments. Yeah. So any other questions? John, I assume we've answered, or you have a new question since you're still raising the hands there.
Awesome. I want to thank you guys for taking the time out to attend our Boston data training here at BARI, and in collaboration with City and Community Engagement here at Northeastern. Please feel free to email us at bari@northeastern.edu if you have any questions, or you want to brainstorm, or if you want to set up another meeting with your organization. or department, we are here to do that. So we thank you. If there's no questions, we'll give folks 2 minutes back in their day, and we hope to see you at next month's training. We were sending out a brief survey after this in the next day or two, and we hope we'll be able to get your feedback. Again, thank you guys so much, and I really appreciate it. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.